Welcome to our Meet the Expert. I'm Angela Cripps, the MD of the Recruiting Gym, and we've got Sarah Evans today that's with us. It's going to share how to boost employee engagement without going back to square one. Good morning, Sarah. How are you?
Good morning. Very well, thank you. A bit cooler than yesterday. So
only a little bit, though. It does feel really hot. For those of you that are joining us from around the world, because we're sort of all over, I think, 95 countries at the last click. We're having a heat wave here in the UK. We're not used to this. Hottest temperature ever yesterday, 40.3 degrees. So if you're watching this on catch up, maybe 6 months later and it's freezing cold, remember that day when it was gorgeous. It was hot. We love it. Okay. So if you could introduce yourself with regards to your background, because I've been doing a little bit more digging since I first spoke to you, and there's a lot of fascinating stuff in there. So share with people who you are and what you've done before.
Yeah, sure. So I've got quite a varied background and I'm new to the business world, or relatively new. So my background, my first career was in film and TV. So I worked as a script writer and editor, producer, mainly working with, BBC dramas and developing shows for various places. Did some writing, developed screenplays, and then, as happens, life intervened, and actually working 16-hour days in the film industry and having children wasn't really compatible. So moved on, and was really fortunate that the media courses were kind of growing at universities, and so started to do some talks on various degrees, and then got into teaching myself. And I'd never thought about it, but absolutely loved it. And it was great to be able to use everything that I'd done in my career, working with writers, developing stories, and actually teaching students how to do it and get a career in the industry. So that was great. And then from there, I've decided to take all that I've learned and put it into leadership development. And again, started with coaching individuals around particularly the area of culture and workplace bullying, and now looking at, developing my sort of training with leadership teams. So actually try and head off the problems before they develop. That's what I'm doing.
Fantastic. So we've got your connection for LinkedIn in the chat there if you'd like to get involved. If you're a Brookside fan, I'm sure you've got some stories on that.
Oh, yes. First job. Thank you for showing my age now, Angela. Thank you.
I bet there's a lot of people that are like, oh my goodness, yes. But actually, the one that interested me the most was the what you'd written and produced. I think you directed as well for Bill Nighy. I love him as an actor. I think he's wonderful. So
that was a highlight, definitely. Wrote a short film. And
let's get Bill Nighy's IMDb in there, because people will go Bill Nighy, and then you just have to say the Love Actually, the rock god.
And I kind of fell in love with him a little bit as well. He's absolutely gorgeous. So nice.
I think we all did, actually. Yeah. So wonderful. Another time we'll do a movie session.
Yeah.
From those. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so today is all about employee engagement, something after my heart. And what's interesting is we're rerunning some of our favorite daily workouts, because we're actually meant to be on holiday these 2 weeks, so we're not doing a live every morning. And this morning we had Neil Carberry, who's the chair of the REC. And one of the key things, this was the last day of last year, and he was talking about 2022, and he said one of the big things next year is going to be employee engagement and development of employees. So he got my side, he got your side. I was like, fantastic. So we'll get that link in there as well for the daily workout. So if you're interested to hear what Neil Carberry's predictions were for this year, quite fascinating to watch that again this morning. Right, let's hand over to you. I'm going to mute, so I haven't got my fan blowing on my laptop. Sorry if you can hear that.
Hopefully you can't hear my fan going, but
we will pass it over to you. If there's any questions that are immediate that I think I need to interrupt, I will, but the aim is put your questions in the chat and we'll get 10 minutes at the end to discuss those with Sarah. All right, lovely. Away you go.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so hold on.
If you want to share again,
we're up. Yeah. Yeah, there we go.
It was working perfectly. There you go.
All right, thank you. So yeah, thanks to Angela and Recruiting Gym for inviting me along today. And yeah, welcome to How to Boost Employee Engagement Without Going Back to Square One. A very short and catchy title. Just before we start, I'd like to get you to sort of do a quick exercise, and you can either type the responses in the chat and we can look at it later, or if you've just got a scrap of paper, a post-it note, just sort of have a little think and have a look at those, and we'll come back to this later. So there's hopefully you can see an array of qualities, values, and I just wondered if you could have a look and pick 3. So if you had the chance to pick your perfect boss, and these were the qualities of candidates, what 3 would you choose? Just kind of jot those down, and we'll come back to this a little later. It's always interesting to see what people come up with. So as Angela just said, employee engagement, retention as part of culture is a real hot topic. A lot is being talked about. There's a lot online. You can't go onto LinkedIn without seeing something pop up. These were just a few things that I took recently from posts that people in organisational development had put up there. And employee retention, you see all of these lists for, tips for preventing talent turnover. Culture reflects systemic nature of leadership. And you look at those, the list: employee experience, leadership practices, reward and recognition. Even just 3 around there, and I'm already kind of, oh yeah, we know all this. We know all this. Components of culture. Again, these aren't new to us. They're talked about a lot. They're in training sessions. They're everywhere. Articles everywhere that we look. They're being written about: purpose, values, behaviours, feeling recognised, rituals, cues in the workplace. So there's a lot out there, and you can't really avoid it. But interestingly, it's still a huge problem and a growing problem. And as Angela just mentioned, then, the forecast for it actually is not that it's going to reduce. The problem with it is not going to reduce anytime soon. It's actually growing, and it's very tough for companies and leaders, I think. Everyone's under pressure. Everyone's under pressure to recruit, to get the right people, to keep the right people, and attending trainings, working through different trainings and the information that's out there on retaining employees is not working, because otherwise we still wouldn't have this huge problem. Sometimes people will look to wellbeing strategies, and that's had a huge growth, as it should do, in the industry, in recent months, certainly since the pandemic. And I think there's an absolute place for that. But I think if people only focus on that without digging deeper and trying to sort of fix the root cause, then it's really only ever going to be a sticking plaster and not really kind of, get anywhere fast. The other thing that comes, on the back of talking about culture and employee engagement or lack of engagement is, great resignation. We're kind of a bit over that, I think, in terms of hearing about it and what it means. But looking at, workplace bullying, the results of poor engagement and poor cultures and what that means in the workplace, the problems that brings, the costs that delivers to organisations as well, and of course people, individuals, and the individual cost. So this was a little poll that, again, I picked up on LinkedIn in the last few months, and it was interesting. You got a large number of votes, and I thought it was interesting to see the result. Now, I voted, you can see my tick, I voted for bad bosses on this, probably because it was an issue very close to my heart quite recently. But it's interesting, the toxic environment, and which is a really strong phrase, it's a really, it's almost guttural, it really resonates with people. And the fact that almost 50% of the people in this one small poll took that as the reason that they were leaving. And obviously, there's been a lot of talk about since lockdown and people working at home, having the choice, recognizing what is important to us, what we are prepared to put up with, what we're not. Something that I was talking to a client last week actually about the role of surveys and engagement scores, etc., which is there's a danger of that becoming a sticking plaster in the same way that wellbeing programs could be, although both necessary and they're just part of the puzzle, rather than giving you an answer. You have to kind of work with those, and again dig deeper to kind of find out what the causes are and what we can do about it. And a toxic environment, there are a lot of repercussions and impacts of that. Something that the Workplace Bullying Institute put out last year, I think, talked about the impact of toxic culture, which effectively, there is a scale, obviously, from people feeling a bit, fed up, disengaged with work, to fully disengaged to the point where they're actually not contributing, deliberately avoiding, and having a massive impact on the productivity and performance of themselves, their teams, the company as a whole. But on a personal note, the impact of toxic culture is huge. The report from the Workplace Bullying Institute, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is at its most serious at the end result, 30% of the people surveyed had experienced that. Almost 50% talked about new or worsened depression, and horrifically high 80% talked about paralyzing anxiety. And I think, probably if we're honest, we all experience elements of certainly the anxiety and perhaps depression, but certainly anxiety. I think we all experience moments of it, if not, a deep and certainly not a paralyzing anxiety. But to actually feel that and experience that as a result of the workplace is shocking, and I think is the one of the reasons why engagement is such a huge issue right now, because people recognize how it feels. Again, the same client that I talked to last week, and they're part of a recruitment company, actually, as part of a legal firm. But they were talking about the rise of Zoom as a culture, and having meetings on Teams and all the rest of it. And actually, where previously, a conversation in a corridor or in a meeting, somebody's behaviour or language may have been unpleasant, because you were in that environment and you were in the work environment, you would relate it to being a workplace issue or behaviour. So it wasn't as kind of impactful on you as a person. Once that kind of came into literally our living rooms, or corner of the living room, where you've got an office set up. Once those behaviours and that language or the inference that comes through from somebody speaking to you on screen, that if you hear that and you experience that, it's not remote. It's absolutely here in your home, in your environment, where you feel comfortable. And so I think the rise of complaints about bullying, or the fact that it's noticed more through online interaction, is an interesting kind of sociological phenomenon. Not my area of expertise, but certainly anecdotally, I think it's quite interesting. I think I put a post up last week about it. I remember early on in the days of working on Teams, and a boss who shouted down another colleague who was trying to kind of write a supportive comment to somebody else in the chat, congratulating them on their work, which the boss had just done. He just congratulated them. So it was literally, oh yeah, that's great, well done. And the manager, he really he slammed him down and told him to butt out. It's my meeting. And although we weren't in the room, the atmosphere, you could see it on everybody's faces. It was so uncomfortable. And so I think it highlights how literally in your face that behavior can be when we're at home. So there are lots of ways that these things are managed and measured, as you know, and certainly in terms of recruitment and hiring people, relying on the list of, essential skills, desirables, personality tests, etc., strengths assessments. All of those things come into play in terms of working out, who's the best person for a cultural fit, as well as a skills fit with your organisation. So if we look at some of the information that's out there about culture, and it talks about, combination of organizational factors, you tick off, mission statement, goals, workplace environment, management styles, employee expectations and behaviors. And I don't know about you, I mean, again, that's a list that we're really familiar with, the phrases and concepts that we're really familiar with, but it's all a bit dull. So I think the thing that's missing, and I hope this image is a little bit hazy on mine, so apologies for that. Again, I'm sure lots of you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Back in 1943, he was rather ahead of his time, and talked about the elements, the 5 elements of the needs that we have, having those bases met in order for us to succeed in terms of a human, not necessarily as, in our job. And for me, I think the thing that comes through this is connection. And this is why, culture equals connection, and it can't be ignored. It's the key. You look at, physiological needs at the bottom, and yeah, they're very basic. What I think comes into play is psychological safety, which again is is in danger of just becoming a buzzword, but actually it's vital to, the success of a culture. And part of that is the connection, part of that is the engagement of employees. And connection, I think, is the key element in redefining and boosting employee engagement. If we can focus on connection, then it's inevitable, engagement will improve. Therefore, cultures will improve. Therefore, performance, productivity will all improve. So people want to be, or have the option to be, remote, but they don't want to be distant. We look at, they want that physiological, psychological safety. They want to feel that they belong. They want to feel that they have self-esteem in order to reach the highest level of problem solving, creativity within the workplace and obviously in life. So it leaves a real conundrum for organizations, to figure out how to balance everything. And it's more than a poster in, reception or HR offices or wherever it may be. Again, these are just a couple that I grabbed off, the internet yesterday. And we're really, and please, I'm not knocking these initiatives, it's really, really important. But what I noticed from the people that I talk to and from observing in my own background in TV and film industry, but in various leadership roles across higher education and TV and film, is that these posters, they don't make the connections. And what's really key is that, yes, we can tick off. We know that values are important. We know that leadership's important, ownership of work, recognition, communication, etc. We know that all of those things are vital, but often the connection between those elements and how that shows up in the day-to-day with our in our workplaces, in our lives, is not made, and that's where the gap is. And I think if we can focus on that connection, then that would obviously benefit everybody. Again, looking at the workplace well-being as well, it's somebody that feels disengaged, disenfranchised in the workplace, somebody who feels that their work is ignored or they're not listened to, or that, you know, managers keep information from them, or they're always the last to find out about changes. You know, all of these little things build up to the point where somebody becomes disengaged. And no amount of, you know, looking through how to feel better in the workplace and look at a list of well-being initiatives is going to change that. You have to go to the heart of the matter, which is the behaviours, the cultural beliefs and practices that are in the organisation. So, excuse me while I just grab a little sip of water. I've got a fan blowing on me, so I think it's making me more dry. Okay, so for me, and I would say this, but for me it's really, really simple. Great culture and engagement comes when you connect the story in your head with the story in theirs. And it's interesting, where I came from, you know, starting off in screenwriting and then obviously teaching that and kind of training, you know, writers, script editors, producers in how to, you know, to do that work. We have to make the connection. You know, a writer has an idea and they have to get it off the page, out of their head, sorry, and onto the page. Then a director has to take it off that page and give it to the actors. They have to take that same idea, that story, connect that with what the director wants, what the director of photography wants, what the producer wants, how, you know, all of those elements have to come into play. And it's a very collaborative experience. With one purpose and one goal, which is to create a piece of creative work. So whether it's, you know, an episode of Casualty or an episode of Brookside or, you know, a theatre piece, a feature, an independent feature film, a short film, whatever it is, everyone has that end goal and purpose. And it's very, very clear what the end goal is. And we all have to have our pieces of the puzzle, you know, in place and work together and collaboratively to get there. And I think if we can look at engagement in corporations, in organizations through that lens, it can have a massive impact on getting that connection and improving, therefore, culture and engagement. So my background, I mean, I mentioned a little bit at the beginning. And I developed working in the you know, screenwriting and story. And I think that, as I said, what making those connections in the work practices of the TV and screen, or most creative endeavours, in actual fact, you have one goal and you have to do what's best for that goal. And it doesn't matter. And I mean, TV, I certainly met some personalities far greater. I never worked with HR, never met anybody in HR in the whole kind of 10, 12, 15 years that I was in working in TV and film. You just didn't deal with HR. You dealt with producers, your leaders, your directors. And they were the people that, you know, would meet with you. They either liked you or they didn't. And you fit, you know, the bill. And so each production had its own culture. And you learned very quickly to kind of fit into that culture. And of course, you came across people who worked against that. And certainly in TV and film, which can be a very competitive industry, even though you're working very collaboratively, it is actually quite individualistic as well. So it's an interesting way. And I think that the resilience that you gain from the way that the TV and film industry works feeds in so well into business and corporate situations and problems. And I think because of this, I wanted to look at culture in a different way. So I think, you know, we are all, I love stories, you might have guessed already, but I always wanted to work in storytelling, writing in some way, but I didn't know what it was. I was fortunate enough, I did a great degree in English literature. It's quite old school now these days. The English lit is kind of falling down in universities. But, you know, story, characters, structure, plot, how things worked, what things meant. And all of that is, you know, some people may call it cod psychology, but I don't believe it is. I think it's absolute window into the soul. You learn so much about people, interactions, what works, what doesn't, how to manage people. And that feeds into looking at engagement. And so where story meets people, meets business. Looking back at the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, again, that has developed hugely in the area of self-development in particular. People like, Tony Robbins, who really brought to the fore the idea of, 6 human needs, and we are always, those needs are always needing to be met at various points. So doing that work in self-development transfers really well into business development and leadership development and team development, because you look at what people want, what they need, what their values are, and make that fit within a team so that it works for the best of everybody, that purpose, that that feature film that you want to make. And as I said, the elements that came from screenwriting, looking at understanding character, navigating conflict is a big one, whether in reality or in stories. Deadlines, huge part of working in that industry. Goal setting, talent acquisition, budgets, all of those elements come to play in everything that you do. And of course, they're all elements within the day-to-day of running businesses, whether it's recruiting, hospitality, managing teams, higher education. All of those elements come into play, and so it can be a really useful way of highlighting those elements. They're not fluffy or nice to haves. They are essential, I believe. And I think, I suppose that what made me transition from a job that I loved, a kind of passion that I had for training, future writers and coaching writers and producers and developing their skills from what I'd learned in higher education. I ended up working, in an environment that was not conducive to the values that I held. Now, I didn't know that at the time, and this was like the key turning point for me, because I think we're all quite familiar with values, and there can be various ways of doing values training, but I kind of thought I knew, but I didn't really. And it was only when I was really forced to look at it that I realized that my top value that came out, which was honesty, it was really obvious to me that value could not be met in the situation that I was in. And so it kind of gives you a little sort of coat of armor, kind of makes you feel strong and a bit bulletproof in terms of anything that is going on around you that doesn't sit well with you. So that's on a personal note, but obviously in a business sense and team development and leadership development, and this is where it's key, is that you need to understand your own values and each other's values. And certainly as a leader, you need to have an idea of what are the values that are driving your people, understanding, most importantly, what are the values that are really driving you, and not in a superficial way, in a kind of deep way. So this is a picture of Aristotle. Don't know if you recognize him. It's from a statue, so it's very eerie that he doesn't actually have proper eyes, which I always find a bit creepy. But so for me, story is about much more than making, soap operas and great feature films. It's the core of humanity. If you look at Aristotle, the ancient Greeks are going back 300 years BC, and introduce the science and theory of storytelling. There's so much on it, and I mean, that's a whole separate event and training, but there is so much on how the elements of storytelling and the science behind it play into who we are as human beings, into our interactions, relationships, teams, businesses, etc. And the key to it is universal emotions and universal values, that we all kind of have those elements. And so once we understand our own and we understand each other's, we've got a kind of a window into each other and how we operate. And that helps engagement, that helps to improve processes and systems and practical day-to-day work processes that can be inspired by that, and you can use that. So so I took, I looked at everything that I knew about story and what I'd learned and what I'd experienced, and how that could transfer into a framework to help people. So taking the stories to reality. So if we go back, because I'm kind of throwing a lot of information at you, if we go back to the words that I put up, the qualities that I highlighted at the beginning, and I wonder I don't know if we can get any feedback on any of them. I can't actually see the chat, but there's quite an array of qualities here.
I think it was a little bit too quick the first time. I think I was the only one that got in there. So this is a great opportunity for people to have them on the screen. The LinkedIn Live is about 10 seconds behind as well.
Oh, okay.
You want to put your 3 in. Mine were courageous, intelligent, and funny. So straight down the middle there, in the middle.
Oh, okay.
Says something about me as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's great.
But would anyone pick smug or spoiled or flaky?
Wow. Yeah, you see, you would be surprised. So yeah, we would look at this list and think, okay, generally you're not going to pick a boss who's cynical. That's just going to weigh you down. Somebody that's defended, they're going to be, constantly defensive, potentially passive aggressive, trying to control. Sweet, yeah. Flaky, you don't really want a flaky boss, do you? You want somebody that's strong. Macho, that can only lead to trouble, surely. Smug, yeah. Funny, observant. And it's interesting because these are, as I say, these are traits that you would not normally associate with people that you liked. There are only a few that you would draw out and think, okay, yeah, that's somebody that I would want to be around. That is somebody that I would want to share time with. But if we look, all of those are the character descriptions of the characters in Friends.
Love that.
So it's, this was what, gosh, 20, 30, how many years ago? 94, isn't it? It's a long time ago.
Yes.
It's a very long time ago, but there's a whole resurgence, isn't there? Young people are watching them all. It's constantly on. So everyone kind of knows Friends as a reference. And it's a great highlight of how story and values link, but also in terms of making it work at work as well. So if we look here, if you can see, I don't know if you can read it, but this is the first page from the pilot episode of Friends from '94, and it gives you, which is very common in comedy scripts, you get a short description of the characters. And the thing with sitcoms is that those characters stay the same. They are defined on day one, and if you look at the last episode, they are still exactly those same characters. Those characteristics are in place. So if you look at the list, so Angela, you chose where are we?
Courageous for Rachel.
Rachel.
Intelligent for Ross.
Yeah.
And funny is
Chandler. Yeah.
Chandler, isn't it? Yeah.
He's in a sense of humour. So you can see, Rachel, Ross, Chandler. So you look at those 3 characters, and I think it's safe to say that everybody loves all of the characters in Friends. There's nobody, that we hate, because what the great thing with the character is that they have those characteristics that aren't great, but because they're funny and they're seen as flaws, we love them. So for example, Joey, macho and smug. They're strong elements of his character, and they don't change. He is always like that. But you wouldn't want that in your boss, would you? You don't want those.
No, and I suppose as a friend, we accept those flaws, but in your boss, we don't. Why is that? Why would we not accept it in them? Because you're right. I would love to be in this group of friends. Yeah, they would probably wind me up at some point, but don't they all?
Yeah.
But yeah, I looked at that list and I thought, what? No way.
Yeah.
That really made me smile when you brought that up. I thought that is fantastic, because you're right. What a great way of describing people.
And I think if you look at Rachel, spoiled, adorable, courageous and terrified. Who isn't courageous and terrified? You have to be terrified in order to find the courage to be brave and do the thing that you don't want to do, you know. So it's really interesting way. And obviously, you know, we haven't got time to kind of go into it in a lot of detail now, but you can use characters, you can use people that on screen you love and you accept their flaws. You know, Hannibal Lecter, one of the best antagonists, you know, we love him, but I think you wouldn't want him as your boss, would you? You know, so you look, and it's understanding that we are complex and we are different. We have different qualities and different values at different times, and part of, you know, working with values and doing that training is that you understand that. Doesn't mean that you like it, but you accept it, and you recognize why people maybe act the way that they do, or respond to things in a certain way that they do. I'm hoping that I'm all right for time.
We've got 10 minutes still.
Okay, cool. I'll try and speed up a bit. Yeah, so this is, you know, if we look at defining those values, so there's a list here, and I can give a link to this, so I can, you know, there are lots you can get online as well. It's quite easy to get these word lists that give you a list of core values. So these are, you know, simple ways to start working through. So if you were doing a workshop with your team, you could all start in the place of highlighting every quality in this list, every value that you respond to, that you think, yeah, that's important to me. Yeah, I really like that. That's important to me. And in some ways, you know, most of them will be, you know, relevant to you, but you have to kind of whittle it down. So you go from 15 to 10 to 5, and you end up with your top kind of 3. This often in kind of online tests and things, you know, is done quite quickly. And I think the key, again, you know, is connecting to it, is actually spending the time to really look into situations. So things that I do, for example, I always ask clients, you know, what are your top 3 films or your top 3 stories? And, you know, they always kind of go, oh, you know, that's a bit weird. And I kind of put it to one side, but then it's so fascinating how you can guarantee that there are themes, there are character traits, there are values in there that is the reason that you love them and you're responding to. So really interesting ways to kind of delve deeper into it and find out more about yourself.
Yeah, I'm giggling there because my Courageous, Intelligent and Funny, my top film of all time that I've probably watched 30 or 40 times, is Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh, there you go.
A knight's challenge. Courageous, intelligent, where some of them are, but yeah. Through, and Arthur is intelligent his way through, but funny, obviously. That's perfect.
That's so interesting. And actually but it's very intelligently funny as well. You know, it's a hugely intelligent piece. So those values, they shout out to you. Honestly, it's like you could pick any and work through. And again, you know, I hesitate to, you know, see it as a science, but in terms of who we are and what matters to us, it's a really key way of looking at it. Another thing is you can use is what we call a mirror of admiration. So it's basically looking at real people that you admire. So that can be friends, it can be colleague, it can be, you know, celebrities, actors, whoever. And then looking at their qualities, and often that then feeds back into, you know, you actually have those qualities as well, but you perhaps don't realize it or acknowledge it. And then best times and worst times. So looking at, again, in the workplace, it's quite simple. You know, you look at what one of the best times that you had in work, in your career, and look at why and how you felt and what was going on, and sort of look at the values that come through. And again, do the same for the worst. And so those values are missing. So, I mean, I mentioned earlier about honesty came up as, you know, and it was no surprise to me. Here's the girl that I couldn't even pretend to be. When we were on holiday in Disneyland with my brother, he was like 8 years older than me, and I was 21, and we had to pretend to be married to get these free tickets to Disney parks. And my parents were there, and I couldn't do it. It was horrendous. And just for the sake of going for a free donut, just sitting there saying, yes, we're married. And then we got free tickets. And I was just in bits. I couldn't do it. So, you know, so that came out. It was like, no surprise.
I'm the same as you. At 14, 15, I had to be 18 to get into a TV show, actually, a recording of a TV show. So you would have potentially been on the other side there. And I was sweating the whole time. All I had to do was sit there and not even say anything. But they dressed me up, put makeup on me. I had to be 18 and just walk through. But oh my goodness, the conflict that was going on.
Yeah, I know, and it's incredible. So you can look at those. So I'm sure that if you did your values, honesty would be right up there as well, because they're the things that you can't hide from, and that will follow you everywhere. So once you've defined them, then you have to look at how you implement them. So again, in a workplace setting, so if you've got work values, a company set of values, how are they manifested in day-to-day processes, in interactions, in behaviors? Are those values clear? Are they modeled by leadership teams? And then really importantly, what happens if those values are not followed? So if people, break the rules, in inverted commas, what happens? Because one of the, going back to, the rise of toxicity and people not engaging with that anymore, refusing to engage with it. One of the key things is, if you see your leader, your bosses not manage poor behavior or behave badly themselves, that is that's a line cut, and that connection between you as work colleagues is damaged. So you look at those and how they come into force, and then really importantly, you put them into practice. So this is a vital step. So often in trainings around values, you can do all of those first two bits, and look at values in the workplace, look at your cultures. You all agree that those values are really important, and that we're all going to live by them. And then you go off with your lists and your posters, and everyone's great. And then we forget, or situations come up and we don't know how that fits with the values. And so this is where leaders and leadership development is really key, because they have to embody them. They have to show people what, how they work and stand up for them. And in film structure, this links to, there's a key point, which I probably haven't got time to go into now, but there's a key point in films where characters reflect and respond. It kind of comes, just after they've achieved what it is they want to achieve, and they've got to make that decision to, are they going to go, and they realize that they've fallen in love with this woman. Are they actually going to have the guts to change and go and, ask her and tell her how they feel, for example? It's a really bad example, but there's a moment where you reflect and respond, and that's the key in training, because you then need to look forward, and how are you going to actually put these things in? So meaningful follow-ups, coaching, are very important in kind of embedding the things that you learn and making sure that they keep showing up. And so the way forward, I mean, there's values in practice. This system that I've got, there are lots of different ways of doing it. The important thing is that it's not avoided. I think, talking about square one in the title originally, I think sometimes leaders and leadership teams are worried that doing this work on culture is like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's going to be a huge, long, expensive program, and we've got to go back to basics. We have to rewrite our values, which is not the case. I think a academy trust that I worked with recently had an incredibly strong set of values that across all the 15 schools in the trust, they were lived every single day in terms of the children. Everybody knew them, the children knew them, the children were rewarded, they were highlighted. It's the first thing that, if you asked people, they knew what those values were. But the piece that was missing was the work with the staff. So, for example, a key value of respect, nobody's going to argue with that. That's absolutely key. But staff were becoming disengaged because receiving emails on a Sunday night to prepare something or change a lesson plan for the next day or cover for somebody was they felt crossed that boundary of respect. It wasn't respecting their time at the weekend, wasn't respecting the input that they'd given the week before and the planning that they'd already done, for example. So So it can be really interesting to just kind of unpick and see, and it can highlight really simply where the disengagement issues are. And probably the biggest challenge is time, both in, you know, the creation of the issues in the first place, because often, you know, most people don't intend to create problems. You know, the CEO of that trust, you know, had a huge amount of work to communicate, and but needed it done like yesterday, and needed everybody on board like yesterday. But you can't keep people engaged and connected with that if you don't put the time in. And again, the solutions as well, they don't have to be onerous. You can reset the whole senior leadership team culture and see the impact of it within, you know, 90 days, like 3 months. It can be done. So, you know, it is simple. For me, it's very much, you know, connect the story in your head with the story in theirs. Make sure you're on the same page. Or alternatively, just watch Succession and do the opposite of what they do in there. That's an easy way to do it as well. So, yeah. So hopefully that's come to the end.
That's the next one on my list, I must admit.
Yeah, yeah.
Succession, yes. I want to get that in there. Just finished Breaking Bad. Don't do what they do either.
No. although great discussion about being a good leader. Yeah.
Yeah, and Yellowstone we're in the middle of at the moment as well. So again, that leadership model and people doing things that their leader wants. Now, of course, there's good leadership and bad leadership, but getting people to go with you and to buy into what you're doing is great leadership. Obviously, what you're doing, and if you're doing it with honesty, integrity, or not, or like them murdering everyone that gets in the way. Then that's the key, isn't it? And you're right, that honesty and integrity always comes up in my values. It's part of the gyms as well as fun. So these are key elements that drive who we are and sort of ground us really with people that are like-minded people. We want diversity in everything we do, but we want people with similar values, because that's where that teamwork really kicks in, isn't it? So thank you for that. I have been pushing them for questions, but if they're like me, they were just enthralled.
Sorry, I know I've gone on a little bit too long as well. So sorry.
But it's so fascinating, and I think this is a topic. We do a daily workout every day. So I think for Q4 that we haven't got scheduled yet, we need to bring this in, because we ended the year last year talking about engagement on that last one. So I think the last quarter, maybe engagement should be our topic. So we have a sort of theme every quarter. We started the year with diversity and inclusion, which obviously links to that. And the top, that shocked me. 49% leaving because of a toxic environment. That's an easy fix, surely.
Yeah, well, you would think so. I mean, I think it is, but yeah, people don't seem to look at the things that they need to do.
Well, this is where they need to click your link and get some support and help there. Join us in the gym as well. If you click the green button here in Crowdcast, if you're on LinkedIn Live, then follow the recruiting gym links. We offer free courses, of which this is one. This is number 21 that we've delivered. So lots of different varying topics where you've had an expert talk about them that you can learn a little bit more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And
even more so that you jumped in when we had someone let us down, unfortunately. So we won't name them, but thank you.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine.
It was fantastic. Wonderful. Karina saying thanks as well. Lovely. Right. Well, that's it. Hopefully you can all go and enjoy the sunshine now.
Yeah. Get in front of that fan again.
I've just realised I've left my fan on, so if it's noisy, apologies. I had it on silent, apart from when you were talking. It was just like trying to keep the laptop cool. It's brilliant. Thank you for your time, Sarah. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.